By the end of today's episode, you'll have a fully working MOT booking system using PHP. Users will be able to log in and register accounts and also be able to book MOTs. Each booking will be specific to its own user, therefore only the right user can see their own booking. There will also be admin implementations where admins can go in and log in and mark MOTs as completed. All the code will be available down in the description on my GitHub page, so if you get stuck, have a look down there. But before we get started, if you enjoy watching videos like this, please leave a like and subscribe, as it will mean loads to me, and it will also help this video reach other viewers that are also in the same situation as you, wanting to become PHP developers. So then, without further ado, let's get right into the video. So in today's course, we'll be using a UI framework called Daisy UI. If you watched any of the previous episodes on this channel, then this UI framework might seem quite familiar. Daisy UI provides components that help us with the user interface design. So with that, let's just get straight to creating the project. So open up your IDE. I'm using VS Code for this tutorial, and I'll create a new file called index.php, which will be the root of our application. I will also be creating a login.php page, a signup.php page, and an admin.php page. I will also be creating a folder for scripts, which is where all of our backend logic will run. So inside of script, I'll create one file called database.php, which would be the file where we get to connect to our database. For this course, we'll be using MySQL. As I'm running XAMPP on my computer, I get access to PHP MyAdmin, which is where I'll be managing all of our databases and tables for this project. So let's get to creating a connection to our database. We'll open up our PHP tags. Now I'll create a class for our database. Inside of here, we'll have a property of string server name, which for me will be localhost, as it's running on my local machine. Then I'll create another string property for our database name, which is for me going to be PHP booking course. Or bookings course. I think that makes a bit more sense. Then I'll create another property, private string for our username, which for me will be root. I'll create another property for our password to connect to our server, which is nothing for me. And then finally, we're going to need a variable for our connection, which is going to be a private PDO con. With that, we have set up all of the properties for this class. I'll create a function, a private function connect, which will be used to connect to this database. In a try block, I'll set this con to a new PDO connection. The DSN will be MySQL. Host is equal to, and then we'll get this server name. So my fault, this should be here, just like that. The DB name is equal to this DB name. Then we just need to pass in our username and our password. Then we'll get access to this connection, which has now been created. And we'll give it some attributes. We'll give it PDO attr error mode, which will be PDO error mode exception. Then we'll catch any PDO exceptions. And we'll exit the program with an error message saying database connection failed. And then we can end the message. Get message. Don't know why I don't have any IntelliSense. What's going on? Oh, I don't have an opening bracket. That's probably why. There you go. And that's our connect function done. The way that we're going to run this function, as you can see, is private, is inside of the constructor. That's just the way I like to do it. You can have it, you have to manually call connect every time you create a instance of the database, but I just prefer having it in the constructor. Nice and simple. So public function construct, and we'll run this connect. Perfect. Now we have a solid connection to our database. Of course, now we have to head on over to our database manager and actually create this database. So I'll head on over to my browser as I'm using PHP MyAdmin. I'm going to create a new database up here. And I'll call it PHP, what did I call it? Bookings course. PHP-bookings-course. And create the database. And while we're here, let's also create the structures for our database. We'll have two tables, one for the users and one for the bookings. So we'll create a table users, number of columns. Let's see, we're going to have an ID, a unique identifier for every user. Each user will have a username, an email, a password, an isAdmin property to check if they're an admin or not, and then a created at timestamp. So do 6 columns and create. As I said, the first one will be ID, which we have auto increment on, and it automatically sets the primary key to the primary key. Username will be a varchar of 255. The email will also be a varchar of 255. The password will also be a varchar of 255. And as we're hashing the password, this needs to be 255. For the email and password, you can do other values like 50, 100, 22, whatever you want. But as we're hashing the password, we are going to need 255. Then there is admin field, which will be a boolean. And by default, as defined, we'll set this to false. And then finally, the created at timestamp, which will be a date and time. And by default, it'll be current timestamp. With that, we can click save and save this. Now, as you might have noticed, if you're paying close attention, the type of isAdmin is now tinyInt, not Boolean, because Boolean doesn't really exist inside of MySQL. Instead, we get 0 and 1 as a way to represent Boolean values, which is exactly what we need. So just keep that in mind. We won't be setting this field to false or true. We'll be setting this to either 1 or 0. Perfect. Now let's also create the bookings table. So I'll create a new table. The table name will be bookings. The columns that we're going to have, well, we're going to have another unique identifier for this one. Then we want an associative user ID. Users can access their own bookings and nobody else's. An email specified for the booking, a full name, a date and time, and a status of the booking. And of course, finally, a created at timestamp. That gives us 7 fields. At the moment, we've only got 4 here, so we can go up here and add 3 more. Now, the first one I said would be the ID. Again, auto increment. This will set our index to a primary key. Then we want a user ID, which will be an int, as it will be connecting to our users table. Then we'll have an email, which will be a varchar of 255, a full name of varchar 255, a date and time, which will be a varchar of 255, a status, which will be a varchar of 255, and a created at timestamp, which will be a date and time. And by default, current timestamp. Now, why is our date and time a varchar of 255? Inside of our PHP code, we'll be converting it to a string, the date. So we'll be storing it as varchar 255. Of course, feel free to experiment. There's nothing wrong with it being a date and time. It's just I'm going to be doing it like this. So with that, let's click save, and we've got our next table complete. So let's get to actually writing some logic. Let's start off with creating a login page. Or actually, let's start off with creating a sign up page, as we need to create a user that then we can log in with. So we'll go back to our sign up page and let's get to writing some code. So we'll create this HTML template. The title will be sign up. And before we actually get to writing anything, let's actually connect Daisy UI to our project. We'll be using the CDN to do this. So heading to Daisy UI, click on menu, CDN. This is the CDN to use to install it. So I'll copy both of these lines, head back to my project, and paste them inside of the head tag. Great. So let's go into our body and let's get to writing some code. First things first, I'm going to set a min height to screen. So take up the whole height of the screen. We'll set the background to base of 200. And we'll set all the items to be vertical flex columns. Then we'll create a main tag, which will be the main section of our code. We'll give it a class flex1, item center, justify center, and padding x of 4. Then I'm going to create a card. So this will be a div, class, card, width of full, max width small, background base of 100, and shadow dash XL. Then I'll create another div inside of that. Give it a class, card, dash body, where all the contents of our card will go. I'll create a h2 tag with a class of card title, justify center, text center, text dash 2XL, and we'll say get started. Below, I'll add a p tag with a class text center as well, text small, text base content dash 60, where I'll say register your new account. Then we can open up a form tag. We'll set the method to be post. The action, that's not the action. And the action will leave us empty for now. We'll get back to that in a second. Inside of our form will be all of our inputs. So we'll start by creating a div, class of form control, and margin top of 4. Inside, we'll add a label with a class of label. Inside, we'll have a span, class, label, text, which will be our username. Actually, now as I'm going through this, I don't actually think we need a username for a booking system. So let's actually just remove that and set it to email. We'll just have an email and password set up. So we can head on back to our table, head on over to users, structure, and we can drop one of the columns, username. We won't be needing this anymore. The reason it was like that is if you watched the previous episode on this channel where we create a login form, this code is almost identical to that, except for we're adding extra booking features. So that's my fault. But let's just keep going. No harm has been done. So as we're here, we can now create an input. The input will be a type of email. The name will be email, be a required field, and we can add a placeholder of something like account@example.com. And finally, a bit of styling. Class input, and actually input bordered. Give it a little border. And that should be one of our inputs done. We can duplicate this down 2 more times. our second input will be for our password. The type will be password. The name, I'll set also the password. And the placeholder, I'll just have a couple asterisks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here we can add another property though, which will be min length, where the minimum length needs to be 8 for this input. I think actually it'll be a bit easier if we copy this now, because what I'm going to do now is have a password confirm. So the user will have to enter a password and then confirm that password. So password, actually verify password. That sounds so much better. The name now will be password verify, and everything else can stay the same. Then below these divs, I'll add a button, the type of submit, and a class of button, button neutral, margin top of 6, and a width of 4. And inside, we'll have the text saying sign up. Below, we'll open up a p tag. Actually, first let's give it a class of text center, text small, and a margin top of 4. Then we'll say already have an account. Below we'll add an a tag. The href, we'll go back to this. The class will be link and link primary, and it'll say login. Actually, let's set the href already before we forget. This will take us to our login.php page. So let's take a look at how that looks. I'll head on over to my app, reload. Of course, this takes us to our index page, which has nothing on it. But in the URL, if I go to login.php, if I go to signup.php, here is our form. As you can see, our text doesn't seem to be centered. Let's have a look why. Text center, text center. How odd. Let's try justify-center. Reload, and there you go. Great. All these inputs are now working. Click login, it takes us to login.php. Of course, this doesn't exist yet. So, with that, let's actually get to creating the functionality. We've got the UI, now it's time for the logic. We'll set the action inside of our form to script/register user.php. So now if we head on over to our scripts folder, we'll create a new file called register user.php. And inside of here, we'll open up our PHP tags and we'll start writing the logic for this. First, we're going to start a session with the session start function. We'll check if the server method, so request method, was equal to post. Then we can validate our inputs. So we'll say inside of this if block, if empty, post, and I had email, or let's duplicate this twice, or post password, or empty password verify. Then we want to redirect the user back. So we'll do header location to a directory back and sign up.php. And of course, exit the program. Now we started a session above. In our session, we'll be storing stuff such as errors, success messages, and also user details. So we can add a session here, which will be error. And we'll say empty input sir. We can then access this session inside of our project anywhere, and we can display this error message to the user. So we can get that. We'll do that in a minute. First, let's carry on with this. We'll create a new variable email. which will be from our post, email. We get a password variable, which will be from our post password. And let's duplicate this down. We'll have verify password, which will be password dash verify. Verify. There you go. Now let's do some input validation. First, we want to check if our email is a valid email. So we'll check if not filter var, our email variable, with the filter as filter validate email. Pretty much this function checks if the email is a valid email and returns true if it is. Of course, we want to check if it's not correct. So we'll flip the logic with the exclamation mark. And again, we can copy this error handling stuff here. Paste, error, and we can say something like invalid email. Then we need to validate the length of our password, as we want our password to be at least 8 characters. We've already specified this inside of our signup.php file with our min length here. But of course, anyone can just change the client-side code, which means they can bypass this feature. This is why we're checking for the empty inputs and filtering our email to make sure it's a valid email. So let's check if our password is the correct length. So if password, actually first, we'll use the function strlen, which gets the length of the string and returns it. If that is less than 8 characters, we'll just do the same thing here. Copy that, paste it here, and we'll say password must be at least 8 characters long. Then we need to verify that our password and our verified password are the same. So if password is not equal to our password verify or verified password, we'll copy over this. We'll remove all the contents in here and we'll say instead passwords do not match. Great. So with that, we've done all the input validation we need. Now we just need to hash the password and send it off into our database. So first we need to hash the password. To do this, I'll create a new variable called hashed password, which will use the password hash function inside of PHP, which takes a password as a parameter, and then the algorithm, which will use password default. This hashes our password for us and stores inside of our hashed password variable. Now, all we need to do is post this to the database. So, post data to database. So we'll require once our database file, which is our database connection. I'll create a new variable, which will be the new initialization of our database. And as if you remember, inside of our database, we actually connect automatically through the constructor. Creating our object like this automatically calls the connect function. Now, we need to actually create a function that will post the data to the database. To do so, we'll head to our database file and we'll create a new function. I'm just going to minimize these functions as we don't really need to bother with them at the moment. So we'll have a public function create user, which will take in a string email and a string of a hashed password. Then we'll write an SQL query, which will go insert into users for email and password, as that's what we called inside of our database, values, and we'll say E and HP for hash password. Preparing our statement like this lets us embed our variables in afterwards. This can prevent stuff like SQL injection, and it's just a safer approach. So then we'll create a statement variable, this con prepare, where we prepare our statement, which will be our SQL query we created above. Then we can return the statement execute, where we'll pass in an array of our parameters. So we pass in our email and our hashed password. Now, back in our register user script, we can now utilize this function and actually create a user and insert them into the database. So we'll create a new variable for result, which will be our database create user with the email and our hashed password. If we head on over to create user and take a look at this function documentation, the execute function returns true on success, or false on failure. So we can use an if statement to check if this operation was successful. So if result, and first we'll check if it was false, so that means it failed. We can copy this code over here again, paste it in, and say something like database error, because something happened with our database. When we get to here, we have successfully created a new user. Now you can do a couple of things here. The first, we can automatically log in the user, create all the session variables, so they don't have to go and log in again after creating an account. Or we can redirect the user to a login page where they'll have to re-enter their details to log in. Personally, I like the first approach better, so that's what I'm going to do. So we'll create a session variable. First will be our success message, which will be created user successfully. Then in a session, we'll have user logged in, which will be a Boolean variable. We'll set this to true. We'll have another variable, which will be user email, which will be set to the email we got above. And then after the function, we can say header, location, index.php. Actually, let's put it here, because over here, I want to have header, location to our sign up page. And why is that? Well, if you look over here, the if statement and all this code inside that we just wrote only executes if the server method was a post. So what if someone accesses it without doing a post method? Then we just want to redirect them to the sign up page. I think that's the most logical thing. Of course, you can do whatever you want, take them to the index. I think it's just more logical to just take them to the sign up page if they're trying to access a register user script. So with that, I think that's everything. Or is it? Usually, for later on in this project, not only are we going to need the user email stored in our session, we're also going to need something like a user ID. And we don't get a user ID because our result from our database just returns a Boolean. And we never specified a user ID here because that's automatically managed by MySQL. So to get that, we need to create a function that actually retrieves the data for the user from the database. So we can use a function such as fetch by email because we've got the email. So then, back in our database, we can create a new function, public function fetch user by email. We'll pass in a string email. Then we can write our SQL, which will be select star from users where the email is equal to E. Then we'll create a statement. This can prepare. I'll prepare our SQL. Then we'll execute our SQL. So statement execute. We'll pass in our email as a parameter because that's what we're trying to change here. And then finally, we'll return statement fetch, PDO fetch ASOC. This will fetch with a PDO fetch ASOC, which pretty much means we're able to do something like this, where we get our user returned, and we can use PHP key value pairs. So ID, which will return their ID. Pretty much returns the data in an associative array. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what if there's a user, there are accounts with the same email? How would that work? When it return all of those emails? Yes, it will. Here you can do a couple of things. I personally think the smarter thing to do is to just allow for one email to be created. So this is where we can now utilize this function and use it twice. So instead of our register user, when we say our email validation, yes, this is a way to validate the email is valid. But let's also check that there isn't an account that already exists with it. I'll quickly move these two files, or these two lines of code, up over here so we can access them. And I'll check if db fetch user by email, where I pass in the email, and if that returns anything, I should probably put not equal to null, because if we head on over to the database function, fetch actually returns, false is returned on failure if there are no more rows. Okay, never mind, we need to do false. So instead of this, if it is not equal to false, that means that there is already an account with this email. So again, we'll head on over and copy this code and we'll say email already in use. So after this point, we are certain that there actually isn't an account with this email. Then again, we'll call this function down here. We'll say result, as we can override this variable now because we don't need to worry about it over here. Result will be db fetch user by email. We'll pass in the email because before over here, if there isn't a user, it will return false. But now we create a user with the said email, so now we're able to fetch them. So now we can actually set the user ID as we now have it inside of this result variable. So I'll say user and then ID is equal to more result, the ID that's returned. Perfect. That is our sign up registration done. So let's put it to test. Let's refresh the page and let's create an account. Say user@example.com, password of password, and verify with password. But first, actually, let's put in a shorter one. Sign up. It needs to be at least 8. If I get rid of this validation, wherever it is, here it is, and sign up, Oh, I need to get rid of this one as well. Sign up. Oh, it looks like we have a problem. Invalid parameter number. Parameter was not defined. In line 36, fetch user by email. I think this is because we actually need to store this inside of a variable. So we'll say result is equal to this, and then check if the result is not equal to false. So let's try this again. Say pass. Again, let me quickly just try and remove all of this validation over here. Sign up. Again, we have the same error, invalid parameter number. I think this might be because of the way we've done it here. We need to do it like this, as a key value array. So we'll set E to be our email, which means this will probably have to change as well. But first, let's take a look if that was the error. Reload. User at example.com. Pass and pass. Again, I'm going to delete the validation. Sign up. And there we go. We've taken us back to our sign up page. Of course, we don't display the error. First, let's take a look if we actually have any users. Nothing. So that means the execution failed. And this is also the reason why we got the error. So over here, we actually need to change this. So we'll set our E to an email. And we'll set the HP to the hash password. Oh, you put one of these in here. Just like this. Perfect. So then, let's now try to create a valid user. Oh, actually, no, first, before we do that, let's actually show the errors. So we store the errors in a session, which means we can access them through our session. So PHP inside of our sign up form, session start. And then let's do it above the form. We'll have PHP tags. We'll check if is set from our session error. We actually have this set. And then we can run whatever's inside of here. So PHP end if. And we'll say, we'll create a span, we'll give it a class, text small, text error, and text center. And inside, we'll print out whatever is inside of our session. And of course, after we display our error, we don't need it anymore. So we'll just unset whatever's inside of our session error. So PHP unset session error. Just like this. Great. Now let's have a look for our errors. Refresh. The password must be at least 8 characters long. That's what was stored in our side of our session before. As you can see, when I reloaded it again, it got rid of it because we deleted it straight afterwards. But of course, the error message stays on until the website refreshes. But now let's try something like an invalid email. Sign up. Okay, of course, we need to actually get rid of this type and say it's text. Of course, we're going to get a bit of an issue. So let's actually create a password that is long. So let's do password and password. Sign up. Invalid email. Great. Now let's actually try some valid details. User example.com. Password and password. Sign up. Nothing happened. But if we go to our database and refresh, we can see we now have a user with an ID of 1, password as a hash password, is admin as 0, which means it's false, and a created at timestamp. Perfect. That's our sign up functionality done. I say we can create the login functionality, which will be very similar to this register functionality. So I'll create a new file. Oh, actually, no. So I'll head on over to our login. Actually, let's head on over to our sign up and copy all the contents in here, as it will be very similar. I'll paste this in here. I'll change the title to say login. Instead of get started, we'll say welcome back. The p tag will say login to your account. We won't need the password verify input. The button, the button will be login. The p tag at the bottom will say don't have an account yet. And then we'll have sign up. Then we can change our script to be login user.php. And that looks good to me. Head on back and let's head on over to the login.php page, login.php. And here you go. Here's our login form. So let's create the functionality for the login form. As I set it here, we'll go to script /login-user. So login-user.php. And let's copy over the logic from our sign up, as again will be very similar. So copy, paste in our login script. First we'll check for our inputs. We won't need a password verified, so it doesn't exist anymore. So we can get rid of it here as well. We can still validate the email. We don't need to check if the email exists. We can check the password length. We don't need the password verified, it doesn't exist anymore. We don't need to hash the password either. And now we're over here to the database. We won't be creating a user. We'll be fetching user by the email. So we'll pass in the email we got from our input. So now we can run some validation. First, we can check the result is false, which means nothing was returned. This means that we can say user doesn't exist. Then we can check if our passwords match. So we'll create an if statement saying if result password. Actually, first, we need to surround it inside of a function inside of PHP, the password verify function. Because of course we've hashed the password, so we can't just compare the hash password to the password input. And we can't just rehash the password that we just got an input in and compare that. That won't work. We need to use PHP's password hash function. So password verify. We'll pass in the result from our password, and we'll also pass in the password that we got as an input. I need to spell this right, verify. There you go. Now this will return true if they match, or they'll return false if they don't, which means we'll flip the logic with this exclamation mark, and inside of here, we'll do the basic old error handling. So say password incorrect. Great. So when we reach here, we have successfully been able to find the user. The user does exist inside of the database and a password matches. So all that's left is to just create a session with all the information for the user and then redirect them, I guess. So we'll get rid of this result as we don't need it. Success, we can say successfully logged in. User logged into true, the email to email, and the ID to the ID. I think that's everything we need to do. Let's quickly have a look. Oh, look at these headers. They all say sign up. We need to go back to the login page this time. So I'll hold Alt on my keyboard and I'll click on all of these, which will create multi-line cursors. That's the wrong place. Right here, and right here. So out of here, I'm just going to change this all to login. Great. So let's go over all the logic. Check if the inputs are empty. Then we make sure the email's a valid email. The password length is the correct password length. We try to check for a user in the database to see if there is a user with that email. If there isn't, there's an error. If there is, we're going to go check if the passwords match. If they match, we can then create the user session and log them in. Great. So we go and check the functionality now. As you remember, I created an account, which was user@example.com with a password of password. If I log in, it should redirect me to the index page. Oh, password incorrect. See, if you hover over the password verify function, you can see a first parameter is the password and the second one is the hash. And as our hash comes from our result, we need to quickly flip this, like this. Reload, user@example.com, and then password. There you go. Something happened. But we're still in login.php. Why have we not been sent to index.php? Oh, this is because PHP kind of doesn't actually exit the script when the header is called, which is weird. You would think if you're redirecting, it cancels the rest of the script. It doesn't. We need to put an exit call here, which means in our sign up or register, we also need to put an exit call right here. I reload the page, user@example.com, password, login. Now we're in the index.php page. Of course, there's no contents on this page, but that means we are logged in correctly. Great. So all that's left for our user login sign up functionality is a logout feature. Luckily, this is one of the easiest features to implement. We'll create a new file, logout, inside of our script, open up the PHP tag, and we'll say session start. Then we'll set the session to an empty session or an empty array, and then session destroy. And then we'll send the user back to, let's say, header location index.php. And just so that our logout function is complete. So let's have a look at that. If I do /script logout.php, we should get taken back to the index page. Let's quickly add some information on here to see if we are logged in or not. So I need to start a session as everything is stored inside of our session. So PHP tag, session start, and then end the PHP tag. Inside of here, we'll open up some PHP tags and check if is set. We'll check if the user, and then what did I say it as? User logged in. So user logged in is set. If it is, let's actually close the PHP tags over here. If it is, we'll echo out logged in. Else, we'll echo not logged in. If we go back here and refresh, we now see not logged in. But if we head on over to the login page and try to log in with our user@example.com with our password, you can see we have logged in. And then finally, we'll do /script logout, and we're not logged in anymore. Perfect. Our logic works as it should. So then, let's get to actually creating the booking functionality. So how we're going to have it is we're going to have on our index page, after a user logs in, we'll have an opportunity for them to create a new booking. And on the left-hand side of the page, sorry, I should have said, on the right-hand side of the page will be the booking form to create a booking. And on the left-hand side, we'll have a table that displays all of the users' bookings that they have booked. With that, each booking will then have, obviously, the information such as the name, the email used, the date and time for the booking, and also a status. which will be changed by an admin, which we'll also get to doing later. So make sure you stick around. But for now, let's actually create these forms and tables so we can then display the actual data. So as we are already inside of our index page, let's actually get to creating that. First things first, we actually need the import for our Daisy UI. We can get this from our sign up page. So I'll copy these 2 lines, go over here and paste them in. Inside of our body, let's get to writing the code. So our body, I'll give it a class. The class will be min height of screen, a background base of 100, flex and flex column. Then we'll create a main tag. We'll give it a class of flex, flex-1, flex col, items-center, and margin top of 4. Then let's do some validation. Because obviously if a user isn't logged in, we don't really want them to be able to book anything or see their bookings because they can't, that they're an anonymous user. They don't have any bookings associated to an anonymous user. So with that, we can do some PHP validation. And as we stored all of our stuff, such as is user logged in inside of our session, we can then check it like this. We say if is set, and we can check if is set in our session, our user logged in. If they are, any of the code below will execute. PHP and if. So first, I'll create h1. I'll give it a class of text-5xl, font bold, and margin bottom of 12. Inside of here, we'll say welcome, and I'll echo out from our session the username. Of course, if this doesn't exist, we can echo out nothing or an empty string. This is just some extra validation in case something becomes null, because if it becomes null, the application crashes. So we could do something like this. Of course, you can have another way of doing it. You can have the if condition here, put it inside of here, or you could just have something like this, nice and basic. Then I'll create a div, which will have a class of grid cols 3, and a gap of 24. Now, as you can see, I'm going to start writing code with this shorthand where I start writing it like this, and then it automatically fills in the stuff for me. So to do that, dot means class. As you can see on the right, you have the Emmet abbreviation. As you can see, it creates a div with a class and puts your cursor in the class. Of course, you can follow along. Most IDEs do have this. So it's a bit quicker for me to write code because class names, they take a bit of time to go back and create. Anyways, let's carry on. So let's see, where were we? Okay, div grid cols 3. Now, as I said, the right-hand side of the page will have the actual booking, and on the left will be all your bookings. So why am I making 3 grid columns? Well, something known as grids spans. You can have 2 elements, but one of the elements can span over 2 columns, which means it will just be a little bit wider than the other one, which is what I'm going to have here. So I'm going to create another div, col span 2, a width of 4, a background base 100, rounded -xl, a shadow xl, a padding y of 2, and a padding x of 2. In here, we'll have our users' bookings. So we'll create a h1, we'll give it a text 2xl, a font semi-bold, text center, margin top of 4, and margin bottom of 4. Inside of here, we'll say something like your MOTs. It could be anything, general booking system. I'm just going with MOTs because it was the first thing that came to my head. Then we'll create another div, which will have an overflow, x auto, and here we'll have our table. So this table, let's actually structure it first. soon we'll replace this with our database queries, where we're actually able to get data from our database and display inside this table. But for now, let's just do a basic rough sketch to have a look at what we're going to be creating. So I'll create a T head. Inside of this T head, create a row. So this row, let's give some headings. We'll do the date. We'll do the name. We'll do the email. And we'll also do the status. Then inside of our table body, we can add a row with some entries like the 26th of the 4th, 2026, at the time, let's say 10 o'clock. Another one, this one's going to be name. Let's do John Doe as an example. Another one, which will be the email. Let's just say john@example.com. And the status will be scheduled. So let's head back over to our index page, reload, and see what we've got. Nothing. This is because we're not logged in, and we're checking if the user logged in session is set. At the moment, it is not. So that means we need to log in. So let's actually go into our login page, log in to our user@example.com with our password, and here we go. This is it. Now, this does look a little bit mediocre. It's because we've got to add the class name, which will be table and table zebra. Reload. That's much better. This is the power of Daisy UI. 2 class names, and we get such a nicer class table. And the nice thing with table zebra, why I chose it, is if we create another row, it will alternate the background color. As you can see, this one's just a little bit darker. So I like that. Of course, head on over to Daisy UI and read over the documentation and see what you like. Anyways. Oh, I just remembered. Why are we doing user.username? We need to do something like user email, as the username doesn't exist anymore. That is bad from me. I'm so sorry. I was wondering why there was nothing showing on the top. It is because we don't actually have the username. I was just making sure we actually didn't put it. So if I reload this now, we have our user. Of course, you can just have basic text, but I like to at least have that. It's a bit more dynamic. So here we go. We've got our table. Looks good. Now we need the way that the user can actually book on. So this will be outside of our final div, or this div here, I should say. We'll create a new div, which will be flex items-center and justify-center. Inside, we'll create a card, which will have a width of full. The max width will be small. The background base will be 100. And it will have a shadow XL. This will now be quite similar to what we had for our login, which actually means we can copy a decent amount of the code. I'm just going to quickly, while we're here, add the body. So I could do .card body. And then we can copy the rest of the code from something like our login form. This is not a login form, this is a login script. Our login form. As you can see here, we have stuff like this. Let's copy all of this here down to the bottom closing form tag. Paste it in here, format it. And let's see. Welcome back. We can say something like book and MOT. Not and, book and MOT. Book a MOT. The P tag can have something like book a MOT now. Or MOT appointment now. The error handling. Then our form, which will not be taking us to login user. It will be taking us to somewhere like booking, which we'll create in a minute. Then we'll have our email. We don't need our password, but we will need a couple different inputs. So I'll duplicate this a couple times. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Email, we can keep. Full name. The type will be text. The name will be full name. The placeholder will be John Doe. The next input will have our date. The type will be date. The name will be date. It won't need a placeholder. Then time. The type will be time. Name will be time. And again, doesn't need the placeholder. And actually, we don't need this final input, as that's all the inputs that we need. We also don't need this p tag. And finally, the button. Let's actually change it to something like book now. Great, let's see how that looks. Reload. Great, that looks quite nice. Of course, they're just a little bit close together. So let's have a look at why. Oh, this is because we didn't put a dash over here. Reload, much better. Now users can click here and enter inputs. That's perfect. But one thing I noticed is we don't have a navigation bar. Any website needs a navigation bar, let's be honest. So let's create that now. At the top, above the main tag, I'll create some space over here. We'll create a nav, which will have a class of navbar, which is coming from our Daisy UI, and a background base of 100. Inside, we'll have a div, which will be called navbar start, which means all the elements inside of this div will be on the left-hand side of the navbar. Inside of here, we have an a tag, with a class of button ghost, and text Excel. The href will be index.php. And inside of here, we'll just have something like home. Then we have another div. This one will be navbar end, which will be on the right-hand side of the navbar now. And we'll also have a space space x2. And inside of here, we'll have all of our different functions, such as login, sign up, log out, or even the admin panel if you're an admin. So this will take a couple PHP conditionals. So PHP will check if is set from our session user logged in. We're checking it if they are logged in. If they are, let's put that end if over here. So if they are logged in, we'll create another PHP conditional here. If is set, our session is user admin, which at the moment we actually don't have in our session, but we'll get to that when we create our admin functionality. So we'll check if it's set and that the session user admin is equal to 1. As you remember, as I said, there is no true or false. It'll be 1 or 0. So PHP end if here. So if there is an admin logged in, what we can do is we can create an anchor tag. We'll give it a class of button and button ghost. And the href will go to admin.php, which will be our admin page. Of course, we'll give it a text of admin. After this, we'll just have a basic anchor tag, class of button dash neutral. The href will be script logout.php, and the text will be logout. This will be our logout button, sorry. Now we can check else if the user is not logged in. We'll create an anchor tag, button ghost, the href will be login.php, which will be login. And then we'll create another one, which will be to our sign up.php. And this time we'll have button neutral. And the text will be sign up. And I think that's everything for our navbar. So if I go back and reload, that is looking good. The only problem is that our background base should be 200. Reload, much better. Now you can actually sort of see the navbar. It's still quite hard to see, don't get me wrong. We can add a shadow or something like that. But for now, this is good enough. As you can see, we have one logout button. And if I log out, it looks like our URL wasn't found. This is because we are redirecting to a script, not our scripts. So if we go back, you can see script, it should be scripts. Go back and reload, log out. There we go. Now it's worked. All of the content has gone, and we get a login and sign up button. So let's do a login. user@example.com, password, enter to login, and there it is. So then let's get to actually creating the booking functionality. So if I head on over to, where is it? Down here in our card, we have script/book booking.php. So let's create that script. book-booking.php. So we'll open up our PHP tags and start a session. Then we can check if the server, if the request method was a post. Then we can do some validation, making sure that our inputs weren't empty, as they are required. So empty, post, email, or empty, post, full name, or empty, post, date, or empty, post, time. If any of these are empty, we'll create a session for our error, which will say empty input. So we'll send the user back to our index.php, which is actually a directory back, and we'll exit the script. Now we can actually set the variables here. So our email will be from our post email. Then let me duplicate this a couple times. We'll have our full name, which will be our full name from our post. Our date, which will be the date. And finally, the time, which will be the time. Perfect. Now let's actually do some validation. Input validation. Of course, this also counts as input validation. But anyways, input validation. Let's see. First, we need to check our email. We can copy this logic from something like our login user script. Copy this. Go back here and paste it below. It'll be the exact same. Of course, instead, we'll be redirecting to index.php. Now, we need to validate our time. We don't want the user to be able to book in the past, only into the future. So we need to do some validation for that. I'll create a new variable called input date and time, which will be a new date and time object, where we take our date, do a little bit of string magic here, date and time, and I'm going to create a variable for now, which will be a new date and time with no parameters. So now we've got a date and time object with this date and time from our input, and a current date and time, which will be the current date and time of when they sent the booking. And we can do some basic validation, such as if input date and time is less than now. If it is, we're trying to book something in the past. So I'll just copy over this error message over here. And I'll just say, cannot book in the past. Great. After that, I'll create a new variable called booking time, which will be our input date time format. And I'll say, yeah, capital Y. Actually, this is a little bit more specific, but we've got a capital Y, lowercase m, a D, space, capital H, lowercase I, lowercase s. Actually, let's do some colons instead. This means our booking time variable is now a string, and where we transformed our date and time object and we formatted it to this format, which will be the format that will be stored inside our database. This is why I store the date and booking time as a as a string inside of my database instead of a date and time object. It's because I'm converting it to a string here. But with that, everything should be valid. So now what we have to do is check if there already is a booking at this time. Because if there is a booking, we shouldn't be able to book for that time and date. So we'll require once from our database file. We'll create a new database instance, new database. And we'll create a result variable from our DB get booking by date and time. We'll pass in our booking time. Of course, this function doesn't exist yet. So let's go and create it. I'm going to copy this over, go to our database file, minimize these, public function, booking time, it could be a string. And actually, we can copy an SQL statement, something like this. Copy this. We'll say select star from, but this from our bookings table, where our date time, I believe that's what we called it. Let's have a look. Structure. Our date time is equal to our BT, which will be booking time, which I'll just change over here to our booking time. So we'll fetch, and remember, if fetch fails, it will return false, which means it didn't get anything with that date and time. So let's go back here. This now works. We can say if result, because we're not trying to check if it is false, we're trying to check if it's not false. And if we have if result, if that is not null or false, whatever is inside of the block will be executed. So pretty much just checking if result returns any data. If it does, we don't want that. We'll add a new session error, which will be booking unavailable. Oh, someone's already booked it. Then we'll send the user back to the index page, index.php, and exit the script. That's good. Now, with that, I think it's safe to say that we can try and actually create the booking. So we'll create a new result variable, or we'll override it with db create new booking, where we'll probably want to pass in an email, a full name, a booking time, but also a user ID. But user ID, we don't have that. Or do we? We store it inside of our session, if you remember. If you head on over to our login, you can see we set our user ID. And our register, we also set the user ID. So we can access it from our session. So I'll create a new variable, user ID, which will be from our session, user-ID. Great. Let's copy all of this here, and let's go and create a function inside of our database. So, public function, create new booking. I'll just create all of these as strings. And then what we can do, it will be very similar to our create user.
So I'll copy this code in our create user function. Now we can minimize this, be a bit easier to see. And we'll insert into our bookings table our user ID. Let's have a look at this. User ID, the email, the full name, and the dates and time. And also the status. But actually, wait, the status should have a default. By default, it should be set to scheduled, don't you think? Of course, we can do this through the database, like we did with our created app and our ID and auto incrementation. Or we can do it through here, inside of our code. Both are completely valid options. I'm going to do this one through the code to show you how it works. So, status, which I believe that's what I called it. And now we can set some variables. So, first will be our user ID. Then will be our email. Then our full name, date and time, and our status. We don't need to make a variable for it. We can statically set it here as scheduled. Now, of course, inside of our statement execute, we need to actually set these variables or these placeholders to the correct values. So UID will be set to our user ID. The E will be set to the email. The FN will be set to the full name. The date and time will be set to our booking time. And that's it, really. Great. If you go back here, this function is now complete. You can now check if our result resulted in a false. If it did, that means something went wrong. So let's copy this code over here, paste it here, and say database error. Of course, after here, everything has worked successfully. So we can say something like storing outside of our session, our success session, where we say booking created. And then send the user back to our index.php and exit the script. And of course, down here, we can also add a little location index.php in case anyone tries to access this without using a post request. Anyways, now I think it's just time to try this out. But before, we don't actually update the table if there is any data. So I think let's get to actually writing that before we get to actually testing it out, so we can actually see what the user will be able to see. So under this div above our table, we can say PHP if there is a result, which we'll get to now. Up top, we can create require once from our script, our database file. We'll create a new database, which will be new database. And we'll say result is equal to db fetch bookings by ID. And we can pass in something like the user's ID. Of course, we need to put a little bit of validation here, something like if session is set session user ID, then we should be able to run this code, because obviously people that aren't authorized can actually access the index page, so we need to actually prevent them from doing that, or prevent any errors from happening. Anyways, let's create the fetch booking functionality. So in our database, it'll be very simple. It will be something like fetch user by email. Let's copy this, but change it around just a little bit. We'll create a new function called well, what did I call it? I've already forgotten. Fetch bookings by ID. So public fetch bookings by ID. We'll pass in the ID, paste in this functionality here. So we want to select everything from our bookings table where the ID, the user ID is set to the UID. And of course, change this here. UID will be the ID. And we are just going to fetch all of them. So you need to change that to fetch all. Perfect. Back in our index.php page, this code will now function properly. So let's actually utilize it here. So below this table, we'll add my PHP and if. This can stay the same, but then inside of the body, we can then do the loop to display the data. So for each result as a row, PHP, and for each. Actually, I didn't need to delete that. We just need to change the values inside. We can change this to something like this, where we do row, date, time. Whoops, something like that. There you go. The name will be row full name. Then we'll have row email. And then finally, the row status. Just like that. And then what if there is no bookings and the user has not created a booking before? We can create a PHP tag that says else. And we'll just say something like p tag with a class of text small, text neutral, 400, and text center. I'll just say no bookings yet. Great. Let's see how that looks. Of course, as we don't have any bookings yet, we get no bookings yet. So that's working. Now let's actually create one. Let's do John at example.com. John Doe as a name, a date. Let's do a valid booking, so the 28th at this time. Book now. And as you can see, we have the date and time, the name, the email, and the status. And if I go to our database, go to our bookings, we've got a booking here with our user ID of 1, which is a user ID that we have stored in this session, which is also the correct user ID. Perfect. That looks good to go. Now, what happens if we try to do something invalid? Let's do a valid email, like test@x.com, a name of John again, but let's do a date in the past. Book now. Cannot book in the past. Look at that. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. And our database did not update with any data. That's our functionality for that complete. So far inside of this course, we have been able to use the login and registration. We have been able to create valid, authenticated bookings that get stored inside of our database. And we are also able to display these bookings back to the user. All that's left to do now is to implement the admin authentication or authorization, where an admin will get an admin panel or an admin page where they're able to see all the bookings and manage them by setting the status to complete instead of scheduled. So let's get to doing that now. We'll head on over to our admin page first and we'll get to creating it. But first, let's actually copy over some of the contents from our index, such as this PHP tags, the document and the head tags, the body with a navigation bar, and let's also copy the main. Copy that, go inside our admin, paste it, and let's close off all of the other tags that we need to close off. I think this should be just the body tag and the HTML tag. Perfect. Now let's change the title to admin page. Oh, the spelling is awful. There you go, admin page. And then we can do something like this, where we also grab the table. Let's see, where are we? We can grab the table, go back to our admin, paste it in. We'll get rid of this col span. That can stay how it is. All MOTs. And then that will stay the same. All we need to do is just create a function that fetches all the bookings and also make sure that only admins can access this page. While we're in this page, let's actually just do that first. So very simple. If session user admin, or should we say, is set, always got to check if it's set, and the session user admin is not equal to 1, we'll send the user back to our index.php page and exit the script. So if they are not an admin, so this is authorization. Authorization. If they are not an admin, they'll just get sent back to the index.php page. And that's exactly how it should work. So then, we need to actually see inside of our session if there is a user admin, because at the moment there really isn't. We never set the session. And we only want to set it inside of login user. If a user registers, they'll just be not an admin. But here, we need to actually check if they are an admin, because an admin could be logging in. We can do this very simply. So I'll create a session for our user admin, which will be, from our result, our is admin. And remember, 1 is true, 0 is false. Simply as that. And copy this line, and inside of our register, I can also paste it in here. Of course, when a user just registers, they won't actually be an admin, because it's not possible. We don't have logic for that. But that means that they will just be set to 0, which is false. So doesn't hurt. You can do it like this, or you can just manually set to 0. Anyways, now we actually have a user admin variable in our session. So we can actually access this in our admin. So this now works. We don't need to check if there is a user ID, because we don't want to get specifics. We want to get all of them. So then our result will be fetch all bookings. So let's go and create this function. Luckily, this function will be quite simple. So our database, we can copy this here and say public function fetch all bookings. Paste this in here. Select star from bookings. We don't need a where. We don't need any parameters to pass in here. And then fetch all. As simple as that. So back in our admin, this now works. This should also work. So let's see if this works. Of course, first we need an admin user. I'm going to set our user that we currently only have to an admin. So I'll change this here by double clicking on this admin. setting in 1 and clicking enter. Now if we refresh, nothing will happen. It's because we don't set the session in real time. We need to log out and log back in. So user@exampool.com with our password. And now as you can see, we have the admin panel at the top right. If I click on it, we get a big table with all the MOTs, which is exactly what we want. But I want one more functionality. I want the admin to be able to change the status from scheduled to complete. A sort of mark as complete button. Let's do that. So inside of our admin panel, our admin page, where we have our row, I'll create a new TH, which will just be empty. And over here, we'll create one more entry, another TD, which will be an anchor tag, which will be a button. The href will be script / mark completed.php. We'll add a query to our URL param, but we'll set the ID to the current row ID. And the A will say mark, what have I done here? Mark as completed. Just like that. Reload, mark as completed shows up. We can give it a class, another class actually, something like, actually format this a little bit nicer, something as width full. There you go, much better. So let's go and create this functionality. So our script, we'll create a new file, mark completed.php, open up the PHP tags, and we can then check if a GET request with the parameter of ID was sent. So we need to check if it was set. Then what we can do is require once, because we need to access to the database, because we're going to be updating something in our database, which will be, we'll be updating the ID, the booking with the ID we get from the query param, and we'll set the status from scheduled to completed. So db, it's a new database, result is equal to, and what's it going to be? db change booking status, where we'll pass in the ID, which we actually should probably make a variable for. ID is get ID, just like that. So inside of our database, this is where we're now going to be executing our final database execution. Public function, and what did I call it again? Change booking status. So change booking status. We'll pass in the ID. We'll create the SQL, which will be update bookings set status to completed, where the ID is set to the ID. We'll create a statement by doing this con prepare SQL. Then we'll do the return statement execute ID. Just like that. So now mark is complete. This should now work. If the result still happens to be false though, we can still send a session error, which will be invalid booking ID, as I can't really think of anything else. Of course, you can put something like database error. Header. Actually, as this will be the final check, it doesn't really matter. So over here, actually even outside of here, we can have header, location, back to our admin.php. And of course, that means we need to actually create a session. So session start. And as this is also an admin only script in a way, we need to add some authorization to it. So we'll check if is set session user admin and the session user admin is not equal to 1. So if it's false, we'll just simply send the user back to the index. Oh, this is not good. Index.php. And then exit the script. And I think that should be everything. See if this is hooked up. Looks hooked up to me. And let's try it out. So if I go back here and reload, we only have a 1 booking at the moment. So you can see the status is scheduled. I mark it as complete. It now says completed. But we still have this button. I feel like we probably should get rid of this button because we can't mark it as complete twice. So over here, we'll do a little PHP if statement. If the row status is equal to completed. Oh, actually, no. If it is set to something that's not completed, then you can do whatever this is. Oh, sorry, not else if, end if. So if I reload, it should be gone. So that's completed. I go back home, as it is also my booking, as I'm logged in as user. As you can see, the status is completed. Now what happens if I log out? I create a new user. So let's do user2 at example.com. Password and password. Sign up. As you can see, MOTs don't show up. Account, let's do test at t.com. Test, validate, valid time. And let's do another one, t at t.com. Test 2. And another date. Just like that. We have 2 of them. Now if I log out, log in with my other user, so the first user account. As you can see, we only get the ones that are ours. But if we go to the admin, we get all of them. And as you can see, the one that's marked as complete, it doesn't have a mark as complete button, but the other ones do. So I can mark this as complete and this one. And it updates inside of our database as well. So I go to our bookings. As you can see, they're now completed. And if I change one of the bookings to scheduled, like they were before, refresh, we get a mark as complete button. Perfect. I think with that, this project is coming to a close. Except I think we can do a little bit more on the index page. Because if you noticed, if I log out, this looks a bit boring. Let's change that. We check if the users log in here. And we probably have an end if here, yes. So I'll give some space. I'll do PHP else. So if there is no user logged in, let's just do a h1 class text extra 5 pixel, font bold, text center, and say, welcome, please, welcome, stranger. Then I'll create like a p tag, class, maybe text excel, font dash semi, bold, text dash center, and do login, sign up to get started. Let's see how that looks. Perfect. Maybe let's actually add a little margin top of 4 here. There you go. Welcome stranger, log in or sign up to get started. So log in, user@example.com, password, enter, and there you go. Everything is working exactly as it should.
So that marks the end of today's episode. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.